The autopsy said natural causes, but I knew my husband's heart was strong. I found the pill bottle in the trash can, wrapped in a paper towel. It had my son's fingerprints on it. He wants the estate, fine. I'm going to give him a legacy that will follow him to prison. You know, they say grief makes you blind, but I have always found it makes you see things in high definition. When my husband Arthur died last Tuesday, the coroner called it a massive cardiac event. He said it was quick. He said it was natural. He said that at 70 years old, these things just happen. But I have been married to Arthur for 45 years, and I know his heart better than I know my own. His heart was strong, it was stubborn, and it did not just stop without a reason. I stood by the window in our living room, watching the black limousines pull away. The funeral reception was winding down. The house smelled of lilies and cold cuts, and that distinct cloying scent of sympathy that I have come to despise. My son Robert was standing by the fireplace, holding a glass of scotch that belonged to his father. He was wearing a black suit that cost more than my first car. He looked devastated. He was dabbing his eyes with a handkerchief and accepting condolences from Arthur's business partners. He put on a wonderful show. If I didn't know him, I would have believed he was a grieving son who had just lost his hero. But I do know him. I know he hasn't visited us in 6 months. I know he only calls when he needs money. And I know that the tears he was crying were not for Arthur. They were for himself. Robert walked over to me. He put a heavy arm around my shoulders. He smelled of expensive cologne and fear. "Mom," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "you should sit down. You have been on your feet all day. Let Jessica and me handle the cleanup. You need to rest." I looked at him. I looked at his wife Jessica, who was currently shoving Tupperware containers of leftover lasagna into her designer tote bag. "I am fine," Robert the First said, moving out from under his arm. "I prefer to keep busy. Idleness is the devil's workshop, you know." He flinched. He always hated when I quoted scripture or proverbs. He thought it was quaint. He thought I was just a simple old woman who baked pies and knitted blankets. He forgot that before I was a grandmother, I was the lead chemist at a pharmaceutical company for 30 years. He forgot that I know how to analyze a compound. I walked into the kitchen. The catering staff had left a mess. I started wiping down the granite countertops. I needed to do something with my hands, because if I didn't, I was going to scream. I picked up the trash can to empty it. It was full of paper plates and napkins. I tied the bag and walked it out to the garage. On my way back in, I stopped at the downstairs powder room. This was the bathroom Arthur used most often, because his knees bothered him on the stairs. I went in to check the towels. The small wicker trash basket in the corner was overflowing. Guests are messy. I sighed and bent down to empty it. That is when I saw it. Buried under a pile of used tissues was a small orange prescription bottle. My heart stopped. I reached in and pulled it out. It was Arthur's heart medication, digoxin. I knew this bottle. I knew the label, but something was wrong. Arthur was meticulous. He never threw empty bottles in the trash. He peeled the labels off to shred them because he was paranoid about identity theft, and then he recycled the plastic. He had a system. We always had a system. I looked at the label. Arthur Vance. Digoxin 125 micrograms. Refill date, October 12th. October 12th, that was 3 days ago. I shook the bottle, it rattled. It wasn't empty. I felt a cold chill run down my spine. that had nothing to do with the drafty window. Why would a full bottle of life-saving medication be in the guest bathroom trash can, wrapped in a tissue? I opened the cap. Inside were small white pills. They looked exactly like digoxin, round white, scored down the middle. But Arthur took his pill every morning at 8 a.m. with his orange juice. I watched him do it. I watched him do it on Tuesday morning, the day he died. If he took the pill, why did his heart stop? And if this bottle was full, why was it in the garbage? I heard footsteps in the hallway. I quickly shoved the bottle into the deep pocket of my cardigan. My hand brushed against the cool plastic, and I felt like I was holding a live grenade. Mom! It was Robert. He was standing in the doorway of the bathroom. He looked flushed. "What are you doing in here?" he asked. His voice was sharp, too sharp. I turned around slowly. I put on my mask. The mask of the tired, grieving widow. "Oh, just tidying up, dear," I said. "The guests made such a mess." He stepped into the small room. He was too big for the space. He loomed over me. His eyes darted to the trash can I had just emptied. "You shouldn't be cleaning," he said. He reached for the bag in my hand. "Here, give me that. I will take it out." "No, no," I said, clutching the bag. "I have it. You go be with Jessica." She looked like she was looking for her keys. He didn't move. He was staring at my pocket. The pocket where the bottle was making a bulge. "Mom, give me the bag," he said. He reached out and grabbed my wrist. His grip was tight, painful. "Robert, you are hurting me," I said quietly. He let go instantly, stepping back as if he had been burned. "I am sorry," he said, running a hand through his hair. I am stressed, Mom. I just want to help. Let me take the trash, please." He was desperate. He wanted that trash bag. He wanted to make sure the evidence was gone. I looked at my son. I saw the sweat on his upper lip. I saw the panic in his eyes. And in that moment, the denial I had been clinging to since Tuesday finally shattered. Arthur didn't just die. I handed Robert the trash bag. "Fine," I said, "you take it. I am going to go lie down. I suddenly feel very tired." He exhaled. It was a sound of pure relief. "Thanks, Mom," he said. "Go rest, we will lock up." I walked past him. I walked up the stairs. I could feel his eyes boring into my back. He was watching to make sure I went to my room. I went into the bedroom. I closed the door. I locked it. I sat on the edge of the bed where Arthur used to sleep. I pulled the bottle out of my pocket. I opened it again. I poured the pills into my hand. They looked right, they felt right. But appearances can be deceiving. Robert looked like a successful businessman, but I knew he was drowning in debt. These pills looked like medicine, but my husband was dead. I stood up. I walked to the ensuite bathroom. I still had my old testing kit in the back of the linen closet. I used it to test water quality for the garden club, but it had a few reagents that would work for this. I wasn't going to sleep. I was going to work. I moved the decorative soaps and the expensive lotions to the side of the marble counter. I pulled a small ceramic mortar and pestle from the back of the cabinet. I usually used it for crushing aspirin for my rose bushes, but tonight it had a different purpose. I placed one of the white pills into the bowl. It looked innocent. It looked like medicine. I pressed the pestle down. The pill crumbled easily, too easily. Digoxin is a compressed tablet. It is hard, it snaps. This pill turned to dust with barely any pressure. It felt chalky. I wet the tip of my finger and touched the white powder. I brought it to my tongue. You might think it is dangerous to taste a mystery pill, but I knew what I was looking for. Digoxin is bitter. It tastes like chemicals and metal. It makes your mouth pucker. I waited for the bitterness. I waited for the taste of the medicine that had kept my husband alive for 10 years. Instead, I tasted sugar. It was sweet, sickeningly sweet. It was sucrose and cornstarch, compressed into a shape that looked like life, but was actually death. I spat it out into the sink and rinsed my mouth with cold water. I gripped the edge of the sink until my knuckles turned white. I looked at my reflection in the mirror. I looked old, I looked tired. But behind the grief in my eyes, there was a fire starting to burn. Robert had swapped them. He must have done it when he came over for dinner on Sunday. He went to the bathroom for a long time. I thought he was sick. I thought he was embarrassed. But he was in there switching the pills. He put the real life-saving medication in his pocket, and he filled Arthur's bottle with placebos. He murdered his father. He did it slowly, and he did it with a smile. And then he came to the funeral and drank his father's scotch. I heard a car engine start outside. I walked to the bedroom window and peeked through the blinds. Down in the driveway, Robert was loading the trash bag into the trunk of his car. He wasn't putting it in the bin at the curb. He was taking it with him. He wanted to dispose of the evidence somewhere far away. He thought the bottle was in that bag. He thought he was driving away with his secret safe and sound. He slammed the trunk shut. He walked around to the driver's side. Jessica was already in the passenger seat, checking her makeup in the visor mirror. They looked like a couple going home after a boring party. They didn't look like killers. Robert looked up at the house. He looked right at my window. I stepped back into the shadows. I didn't want him to see me. I didn't want him to know that I was watching. He got in the car and drove away. I watched the taillights disappear down the long driveway. I went back to the bathroom. I carefully scraped the powder into a small plastic bag. I put the rest of the pills back in the bottle. I handled it with a tissue. I didn't want to smudge his fingerprints. I knew they would be there. Robert was arrogant. He wouldn't have worn gloves. He would have thought I was too stupid to notice, and the coroner was too busy to check. I hid the bottle inside my hollowed-out Bible on the nightstand. It was a cliché hiding spot, but Robert never opened a book in his life, so I knew it was safe. I lay down on the bed. The sheets still smelled like Arthur. I pulled his pillow close to my chest, and I finally let myself cry. I cried for the man I loved. I cried for the life we built. And I cried for the little boy with the scraped knees, who I had raised to become a monster. But I didn't cry for long. Tears take energy, and I needed every ounce of strength I had. Robert did this for a reason. You don't kill the golden goose unless you are starving. He needed money. He needed it now. And he thought that with Arthur out of the way, the estate would fall into his lap like a ripe apple. He forgot one thing. Arthur was a businessman. He negotiated contracts for a living, and he never signed a deal without an audit. I sat up. I wiped my face. I picked up the phone on the nightstand. I dialed a number I knew by heart. "Mr. Henderson?" I said when the voice answered. "Eleanor? It is late. Is everything all right?" "No, Arthur," I said, "everything is wrong. But I need you to do something for me." "Anything, Eleanor, you know that." "I need to see the will," I said, "and I need to see the financials. Not the summary Robert showed me, the real ones." I need to know exactly how much debt my son is in. There was a pause on the line. Eleanor, are you sure? It is not a pretty picture. Arthur was trying to protect you from it. I am done being protected, I said. I will be at your office at 9 a.m. tomorrow. Have the files ready. I hung up the phone. The house was quiet. It was the first night I would spend alone in 45 years. It felt big and empty. But as I looked at the hollowed-out Bible, I realized I wasn't entirely alone. I had the truth. And tomorrow I was going to get the weapon. The law offices of Henderson and Associates were located in a brick building downtown that was older than the city itself. It smelled of mahogany polish and serious decisions. I arrived at 8:55 a.m. sharp. I wore my black funeral suit again because it was the only armor I had. I carried my purse tight against my side. Inside, nestled next to my tissues and my reading glasses, was the pill bottle wrapped in the plastic bag. I hadn't let it out of my sight. Charles Henderson met me at the reception desk. He was a tall man with silver hair, and the kind of face that had stopped smiling around the same time interest rates went up in the 80s. He had been Arthur's attorney and his golf partner for 30 years. He took my hand. His grip was warm and dry. Eleanor, he said softly, I am so sorry. Arthur was a good man, the best. He was, I said. My voice was steady. But we have business to discuss, Charles. And I don't want tea and I don't want sympathy. I want the file. He looked at me over his spectacles. He saw something in my face that made him straighten his posture. He nodded once. Come back, he said. We sat in his corner office. He placed a thick manila folder on the desk between us. It was labeled Vance Estate Confidential. I opened it. I didn't look at the assets first. I didn't look at the house or the retirement accounts. I went straight to the section labeled Beneficiaries. Arthur had always been generous. 4 years the will had been simple. 50% to me, 50% to Robert. It was a standard split. We wanted our son to be comfortable. We wanted him to build on what we had created. But Arthur was also a man who believed in due diligence. Charles I said, tapping a document near the back of the file. Tell me about Robert's financials. Arthur told me he was helping him with some cash flow issues last month. How bad is it? Charles sighed. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. He looked uncomfortable. It is not just cash flow, Eleanor, he said. It is a hemorrhage. Robert's development company is a shell. He has taken out loans against assets he doesn't own. He has maxed out lines of credit in 3 different banks and what I asked. And there are some private lenders, Charles said, lowering his voice. The kind that don't report to credit bureaus. The kind that break kneecaps. I closed my eyes. Loan sharks. My son, the boy who used to cry when he scraped his elbow, was in debt to criminals. How much, I asked. Charles flipped a page. He pointed to a figure circled in red ink. $750,000, he said. Due by the end of the month. The room spun. $750,000. That was why he did it. That was why he couldn't wait. He didn't just want the money for a fancy car or a vacation. He needed it to stay alive. He traded his father's life for his own. He thinks he is getting the money, I said, opening my eyes. He thinks the life insurance in the estate will pay out immediately. He thinks he is safe. Charles leaned forward. That is the thing, Eleanor, Arthur knew. My head snapped up. He knew. He hired a private investigator 6 weeks ago, Charles said. Arthur was suspicious when Robert asked for a $100,000 bridge loan for a project that didn't exist. Arthur found out everything: the gambling, the sharks, the lies. I felt a fresh wave of grief wash over me. Arthur had carried that burden alone. He hadn't told me because he knew it would break my heart. He was trying to fix it himself. So what did he do? I asked. Did he pay them? No, Charles said. Arthur was a man of principle. He said that bailing Robert out would only enable him. He said Robert needed to hit rock bottom to learn. Charles reached into his desk drawer. He pulled out a document bound in blue paper. It looked fresh, crisp. He did this, I said, pointing to the document. This is the codicil, Charles said. It is an amendment to the last will and testament. Arthur signed it last Friday, 4 days before he died. I stared at the blue paper for days. What does it say? I whispered. It changes the distribution, Charles said. It removes Robert as a direct beneficiary. Instead, it places his share into a strict trust. The trust pays out a modest monthly stipend for living expenses, rent, groceries, utilities. It pays directly to the vendors. Robert never touches the cash. And it specifically forbids the use of trust funds to pay off any debts incurred prior to the date of death. I gasped. He cut him off, I said. He protected the estate, Charles corrected. And he tried to protect Robert from himself. If Robert got a lump sum, the sharks would take it all and he would be back in debt in a year. This way Robert would have a roof over his head, but he would have to work his way out of the hole he dug. I looked at the date on the signature page. October 13th. Arthur's signature was strong, bold. Does Robert know? I asked. Charles shook his head. No. We were going to schedule a family meeting for this coming Friday. Arthur wanted to tell him in person. He wanted to explain the terms. I sat back in the leather chair. The irony was suffocating. Robert killed his father to get the inheritance. But because he killed him before the meeting, he didn't know that the inheritance was already gone. He killed him for nothing. So right now, I said, thinking fast. Robert believes the old will is in effect. He believes he is about to inherit millions in liquid assets. Yes, Charles said. He called me this morning, actually. He wanted to know how quickly we could probate the will. He sounded anxious. He is desperate, I said. The deadline is the end of the month. He has 10 days. I looked at the pill bottle in my purse. I looked at the blue document on the desk. A plan began to form in my mind. It was a cold, cruel plan, but it was the only way to get justice. If I went to the police now with the pills, Robert would lawyer up. He would say I planted them. He would say he made a mistake. He would say it was an accident. And with the best lawyer's money could buy, he might get manslaughter. He might get out in 5 years. That wasn't enough. I need you to do something for me, Charles I said. Anything, Eleanor. I need you to sit on this codicil, I said. Do not file it yet. Do not tell Robert it exists. Charles frowned. Eleanor, I have a legal obligation to. You have a legal obligation to the estate, I interrupted. And the estate is under attack. If you file this now, Robert will know he is broke. He might run. Or worse, he might come after me next. Charles went pale. Come after you. Eleanor, what are you saying? I reached into my purse. I pulled out the orange bottle wrapped in the plastic bag. I set it on the polished mahogany desk. He didn't just die, Charles I said. He was murdered. Charles stared at the orange bottle sitting on his pristine desk. He looked at it like it was a radioactive isotope. He didn't touch it. Murder? He whispered. Eleanor, that is a very serious word. Are you sure you aren't just grieving? Sometimes the mind looks for reasons where there are none. I was the lead chemist for Biovance for 30 years, Charles I said. My voice is cold as the marble in the lobby. I know how to identify sucrose and cornstarch. Those pills in that bottle are not digoxin. They are breath mints crushed into a powder and pressed into a mold. Someone swapped them. And considering Robert is the only person who had access to the house and a $750,000 motive, I am done giving him the benefit of the doubt. Charles took a deep breath. He loosened his tie. He looked at the bottle, then at the file, then at me. If this is true, he said slowly, we need to go to the police right now. We hand this over. They exhume the body, they run toxicology. And then what? I asked. Robert hires a defense attorney. He claims I'm a senile old woman who mixed up the pills. He claims it was a manufacturing error. Without a confession, it's circumstantial. He walks. Maybe he doesn't get the money, but he walks. I leaned forward. I don't want him to walk, Charles. I want him to crawl. I want him to admit what he did. I want to look him in the eye and watch him realize that he underestimated me. What do you want to do? Charles asked. He was sweating now. Lawyers hate going off script. I want you to call him, I said. Tell him that due to the complexity of the estate, probate is going to take months. Years maybe. He will panic, Charles said. The loan sharks. Exactly, I said. He will panic. And then I am going to offer him a lifeline. I am going to tell him that I am overwhelmed, that I am confused, that I don't want the responsibility of the estate. I am going to tell him that I want to transfer control of the liquid assets to him immediately, before the probate even starts. A gift to my loving son. Charles's eyes widened. You're going to bait him. I am going to dangle the carrot, I said. I'm going to make him think he's won. I need him to feel safe. When criminals feel safe, they get sloppy. They brag. They confess. Eleanor, this is dangerous, Charles warned. If he is desperate enough to kill Arthur, he won't kill me, I said. Not until he gets the signature. He needs me alive to sign the transfer papers. That is my insurance policy. Charles looked at the photo of Arthur on his credenza. He and Arthur had fished together in the Keys. They had smoked cigars on my patio. Arthur would have wanted justice, Charles said finally. He picked up the blue codicil, the document that disinherited Robert, and slid it into his bottom drawer. He locked it. The codicil doesn't exist, Charles said. Not until you tell me to file it. Thank you, Charles I said. I stood up. I put the pill bottle back in my purse. Now I have a performance to give. I walked out of the office. I stopped in the restroom in the lobby. I looked in the mirror. I messed up my hair just a little. I rubbed my eyes until they were red. I hunched my shoulders. I wasn't Eleanor Vance, the retired scientist, anymore. I was the widow, the fragile, confused, teetering old woman. I took out my phone and dialed Robert. He answered on the first ring. Mom, he asked, is everything okay? You're at the lawyer's? Oh, Robert I said, letting my voice quaver. It's all so much. Charles is talking about taxes and audits and probate courts. I can't follow it. My head is spinning. I miss your father so much. He handled all of this. Slow down, Mom, Robert said. I could hear the eagerness in his voice. He smelled blood in the water. What did Charles say about the money? When is it released? He said it could be a year, I sobbed. A year, Robert. The courts are backed up. A year. Robert's voice cracked. Mom, it can't be a year. There has to be a way to expedite it. I don't know, I said. But I was thinking. I don't need all this money, Robert. I don't even know what to do with it. I just want to sit in my garden. I was thinking maybe there is a way I can just give it to you. You know business. You know how to handle these things. There was a silence on the other end. A greedy, hungry silence. You want to give me control? He asked. Yes, I said. Power of attorney, or a transfer. Whatever makes it stop. I just want it to stop, Robert. I want you to come over for dinner on Friday. Bring Jessica. We can sign the papers then. I'll have Charles draw them up. Friday, Robert said. Yes, Mom, of course. We'll be there, we'll help you. You shouldn't have to worry about anything. You're such a good son, I whispered. Your father would be so proud. See you Friday, Mom, he said. I hung up. I stood straight up in the mirror. I fixed my hair. I smoothed my jacket. Friday, 3 days. I had 3 days to prepare the house. I had 3 days to set the stage. Robert thought he was coming over to collect a fortune. He didn't know he was coming over for his last meal. They say the devil is in the details, but so is the deception. If I wanted Robert to believe I was a crumbling, confused old woman, I couldn't just say it. I had to show it. I had to stage my life like a crime scene of cognitive decline. On Wednesday morning, I stopped cleaning. For a woman who vacuums her drapes twice a week, this was an act of extreme willpower. I let the mail pile up on the entry table, bills, sympathy cards, flyers. I scattered them so they looked neglected. I took a half-eaten piece of toast and left it on the kitchen counter, next to a carton of milk that I had emptied and rinsed but left sitting out. It smelled like sour milk and abandonment. Perfect. Next, I went to the pharmacy. Not the one we usually used, but one 2 towns over. I bought a weekly pill organizer. I filled it with Tic Tacs. I left it open on the dining room table. The little plastic lids popped up. Some of the pills spilled onto the lace tablecloth. It looked like the work of shaking hands and a foggy mind. Then came the technology. I drove to a specialty electronics store in the city, the kind that sells security systems to paranoid jewelers. The young man behind the counter had a neck tattoo and a bored expression. He looked at me, a grandmother in a wool coat clutching a handbag, and assumed I was lost. Can I help you find the jitterbug phones, ma'am? He asked, popping his gum. I am not looking for a phone, I said, leaning on my cane. I am looking for eyes and ears. He raised an eyebrow. Excuse me? I have a caregiver, I lied smoothly. I suspect she is stealing my silverware. I need to catch her. But she is sharp. If I put up a camera, she will see it. I need something invisible, high definition. And I need it to record audio clearly from across a dinner table. The boy sat up straighter. We have hidden units, smoke detectors, clocks, picture frames. The picture frame, I said. Digital? Yeah, 4K resolution. Wi-Fi enabled. Saves to the cloud. I don't trust the cloud, I said. Arthur always said the cloud was just someone else's computer. Does it have a local hard drive? An SD card? Yeah, he said, impressed. Supports up to 256 gigs. I'll take 2, I said. And a voice recorder. The smallest one you have. I paid in cash. I didn't want a paper trail. When I got home, I went to work. I placed one picture frame on the sideboard in the dining room, facing the head of the table where Robert would sit. I put a photo of Arthur and me from our 40th anniversary in it. It was poetic justice. Arthur would be watching him confess. I placed the second frame in the living room facing the sofa. Then I tested them. I walked around the house talking to myself, testing the audio pickup. Testing 1 2, my son is a thief. My son is a murderer. I played it back on my laptop. It was crystal clear. At 4 p.m. my phone rang. It was Jessica. Hi, Eleanor, she chirped. Her voice was like saccharin, sweet but with a bitter aftertaste. Robert told me about Friday. We are so relieved you're letting us help. It's the right decision. Oh, Jessica, I said, putting a tremor in my voice. I hope so. I tried to pay the electric bill today, and I couldn't find the checkbook. I looked everywhere. I think I might have put it in the freezer. That happens, Jessica said. And I could practically hear her smirking through the phone. Stress does funny things to the memory. Don't worry about the bills. Once we sign the papers on Friday, Robert will handle everything. You won't have to lift a finger. Is Robert there? I asked. I need to ask him about the menu. I don't remember what he likes. He's right here, she said. There was a shuffling sound, and then Robert came on the line. He sounded breathless, tight. Mom, what's up? Robert the first said. I'm making a pot roast for Friday, your favorite. That sounds great, Mom. Robert, I lowered my voice to a conspiratorial whisper. I found another letter from the bank today. It was red. Does red mean bad? Red means overdue, Mom, he said, his patience thinning. Don't touch it. Just put it in the pile. I'll pay it on Friday. Once the transfer goes through, I can access the accounts and clear everything up instantly. Okay, I said, okay, I trust you. Oh, and Robert? Yeah. I was looking for your father's heart pills today, I said. I wanted to, count them? Make sure he didn't miss any? But I can't find the bottle. Do you remember seeing it? Silence. Dead silence on the line. No, Robert said finally. His voice was tight. Why would I see it? You probably threw it out, Mom. You were cleaning, remember? Did I? I asked vaguely. I suppose I must have. My mind is just Swiss cheese these days. Yeah, Robert said. It's gone, Mom. Don't worry about the pills. He doesn't need them anymore. You're right, I said. He doesn't. I hung up. My hand was shaking, but not from age, from rage. He doesn't need them anymore. The callousness of it took my breath away. I looked at the digital picture frame on the sideboard. The little red recording light blinked once, then vanished. The trap was set, but I needed one more thing. I needed the paperwork. On Thursday afternoon, I went back to Charles's office. The receptionist didn't even ask my name this time. She just pointed to his door with a look of pity. She probably thought I was there to sign my life away. In a way, I was. Charles was sitting behind his desk, looking like he hadn't slept. In front of him was a stack of documents, bound in heavy blue paper. This is it. I asked, sitting down. It is, Charles said, sliding the papers across the desk. It looks exactly like a standard transfer of assets and general power of attorney. to the untrained eye, and Robert is untrained. It gives him immediate, unrestricted access to the estate's liquid accounts, the real estate portfolio, and the life insurance payout. I ran my hand over the paper. It felt heavy, significant. And the catch? I asked. The catch is in the notary block, Charles said. This document is invalid until notarized by a court-appointed official, which I am not. And even if he managed to get it signed, the account numbers listed in Schedule A? He paused, a small grim smile touching his lips. Yes, they don't go to the main estate accounts, Charles said. I swapped the routing numbers. If he tries to execute this transfer electronically, the money, if there were any in that specific account, would automatically divert to the American Heart Association. I smiled. Arthur would have loved that. Eleanor, Charles said, his voice serious again. I have the police on standby. Detective Miller is expecting your call. He has a patrol car stationed 2 blocks from your house starting at 6 p.m. tomorrow. All you have to do is press the panic button on your alarm key fob. I know, I said, but not until I get the confession. Please be careful, Charles said. Desperation makes people volatile. I handled nitroglycerin in the 70s, Charles I said, standing up. I can handle my son. Friday arrived with a gray, ominous sky. It fit my mood perfectly. I spent the afternoon cooking. Pot roast, carrots, potatoes. Gravy made from scratch the way Arthur liked it. The house filled with the smell of savory beef and onions. It smelled like a home. It smelled like safety. It was the perfect camouflage. I set the dining room table. I used the good china, the Wedgwood pattern with the gold rim. I set 3 places. At the head of the table where Arthur used to sit, I left the chair empty. I didn't put a plate there. Instead, I placed the digital picture frame. The photo of Arthur and me smiled out at the room. It was angled perfectly to capture the faces of the 2 guests, who would be sitting on either side. I checked the second camera in the living room, recording. I checked the voice recorder in my apron pocket, recording. I checked the pill bottle in my cardigan pocket. It was there, rattling softly against my hip. At 5:55 p.m., headlights swept across the front window. A car door slammed. I took a deep breath. I walked to the hallway mirror. I hunched my shoulders. I let my mouth hang slightly open. I clouded my eyes. The doorbell rang. I shuffled to the door. I opened it. Robert and Jessica stood there. They were dressed up. Robert in a suit, Jessica in a silk blouse. They looked like they were going to a gala, not a family dinner. They were holding a bottle of wine. "Mom," Robert said, stepping inside and kissing my cheek. He was vibrating with energy. "You look well." He was lying. I looked like a wreck. "Oh," Robert the First said, my voice thin and wavering. "I'm so glad you're here. I had trouble with the oven again. I think I turned it on. Is it hot in here?" Jessica stepped in, scanning the room like she was appraising it for an estate sale. "It smells delicious, Eleanor. Here we brought a Pinot Noir. Robert says it pairs well with paperwork." She laughed. It was a cold, sharp sound. "Come in," I said, ushering them into the web. "Dinner is ready. And the papers are on the sideboard." Robert's eyes darted immediately to the blue folder sitting next to the picture frame. He licked his lips. He looked like a starving wolf spotting a lamb. "Great," he said. "Let's eat first, we can celebrate after." "Yes," I said, closing the door and locking the deadbolt. Celebrate. You know there is a special kind of tension that happens when you sit down to break bread with the people who broke your heart. The dining room was dim, lit only by the chandelier and the flicker of the digital picture frame on the sideboard. To Robert and Jessica, that frame was just a sentimental shrine to Arthur. To me, it was the unblinking eye of justice. We sat down. I put Robert at the head of the table. He hesitated, looking at Arthur's empty chair, which I had pushed against the wall, but then his ego took over. He sat down in his father's seat. He looked small in it. Arthur was a broad-shouldered man who filled a room. Robert was all nervous energy and twitchy hands. Jessica sat to his right. She poured the wine immediately, filling her glass to the brim. She needed the liquid courage. "This looks wonderful, Mom," Robert said, cutting into the roast. He didn't even taste it before he looked over at the sideboard again. "So about the timeline, if we sign tonight, I can probably get to the bank first thing Monday." I took a slow, shaky sip of water. I adjusted my shawl, feigning a chill. "Eat first," Robert the First said, my voice trembling. "We have to keep up our strength. Your father always said business should never be discussed on an empty stomach." "Dad had a lot of rules," Robert muttered, taking a bite. "Look where it got him." "Robert," Jessica hissed, kicking him under the table. "What?" Robert snapped. "I'm just saying he stressed himself out. That's why his heart gave out." I set my fork down. The metal clattered against the plate. "Is that why?" I asked, looking at him with wide, watery eyes. "The doctor said it was sudden. But he was doing so well. He was taking his medicine every day. I watched him." Robert stopped chewing. He took a long drink of wine. "Medicine doesn't work miracles, Mom," he said. "Sometimes the body just quits. It was his time." "I suppose," I said, "but it is strange. I could have sworn I just refilled that prescription. The bottle should have been empty if he took them all, but when I looked for it, well, I told you I couldn't find it." Jessica choked on her wine. She coughed, covering her mouth with a napkin. Robert patted her back. "A little too hard." "We talked about this, Mom," Robert said, his voice tight. "You lost it. You threw it out. It doesn't matter." "It matters to me," I whispered. "I feel so guilty. What if I missed a dose? What if I gave him the wrong thing? I get so confused lately." I watched them carefully. This was the bait. I was offering them an out. I was blaming myself. If they were smart, they would take it. They would let me take the fall, for my own senility. Robert leaned forward. He put his hand over mine. His palm was damp. "Mom, listen to me," he said, using his best salesman voice. "You are confused. That is why we are doing this. You can't handle these details anymore. You probably misplaced the bottle just like you misplaced the checkbook. It's not your fault. You're just getting older." "Yes," Jessica added, wiping her mouth. "It's too much for you, Eleanor. Let Robert take the burden. Sign the papers and you won't have to worry about pills or doctors or banks ever again." "You're right," I said, wiping a fake tear from my cheek. "I just want to rest. I'm so tired." "Then let's sign," Robert said, pushing his plate away. "Right now, why wait for dessert?" He stood up and walked to the sideboard. He picked up the blue folder. He didn't notice the tiny red light on the back of the picture frame, blinking silently. He brought the folder to the table and slapped it down in front of me. He pulled a gold pen from his pocket. "Just sign right there," he said, pointing to the line. "And it's all over." I looked at the paper. I looked at the pen. I looked at my son. I needed the confession. He hadn't said it yet. He had danced around it, but he hadn't admitted it. I needed him to say the words. I can't, I said, pulling my hand back. What? Robert's face darkened. What do you mean you can't? I need to have coffee first, I said. And dessert. It's bad luck to sign without something sweet. Arthur always said. I don't care what Arthur said. Robert shouted. The mask slipped, the grieving son vanished, and the desperate debtor appeared. He is dead, Mom. Sign the damn paper. Robert settled down, Jessica said, scanning the room nervously. She's just being her. I don't have time for this. Robert paced behind my chair. I have people waiting on this money, Mom. You don't understand. People? I asked, looking up at him innocently. What people? He froze. He realized he had said too much. Investment partners, he lied quickly. Business opportunities. They expire if I don't move fast. Oh, I said, well, I have a surprise for dessert. Maybe it will help you relax. I stood up slowly, leaning heavily on the table. I'll be right back, I said. I made something special. I shuffled into the kitchen. My heart was pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. I wasn't scared anymore, I was angry. He had shouted at me in his father's house. He had disrespected the memory of the man who raised him. I went to the counter. I had the dessert ready on a tray. But it wasn't cake and it wasn't pie. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the orange prescription bottle. I placed it in the center of a silver platter. Next to it, I placed a small bowl of sugar. I took a deep breath. It was time to serve the main course. I walked back into the dining room, carrying the silver platter. I held it high, blocking their view of what was on it, until the very last second. Dessert, I announced. I set the tray down in the center of the table with a sharp clack. Robert reached for it, expecting a pastry. His hand froze mid-air. He stared at the orange prescription bottle, sitting alone on the shining silver. Jessica gasped. It was a short, sharp sound like someone had stepped on her toe. What is this? Robert asked. His voice was barely a whisper. All the bluster, all the shouting, it evaporated instantly. I found it, I said. My voice wasn't wavering anymore. I dropped the hunched shoulders. I stood up straight. It wasn't lost, Robert. It was in the guest bathroom trash can, wrapped in a tissue, buried under the garbage. Robert looked up at me. His eyes were wide. He looked at the bottle, then at me, then at the bottle again. He was calculating. He was trying to figure out if I knew. So, he said, trying to regain his composure. You threw it out, like I said. You were confused. I didn't throw it out, I said calmly. You did. On Sunday, when you went to the bathroom for 20 minutes during dinner. That's ridiculous, Jessica spat, though her hands were trembling as she reached for her wine glass. Why would he throw out medicine? Because it wasn't medicine anymore, I said. I reached into the bowl of sugar I had placed next to the bottle. I took a pinch and let it fall from my fingers like snow. I tested them, Robert. I was a chemist for 30 years. Did you forget that? Robert went pale. They are sugar pills, I said. Sucrose and cornstarch. Compressed. Professional looking, I'll give you that. Where did you get them? Online. Or did one of your investment partners hook you up? Robert stood up. His chair scraped loudly against the wood floor. You're crazy, he said. You're senile. This is paranoid delusion. Is it? I asked. Then take one. I pushed the bottle toward him. If they are digoxin, take one. You have a strong heart. One pill won't kill you. It might slow your pulse a bit, make you dizzy. But if they are sugar, well then it's just a treat. Go ahead. Robert stared at the bottle. He didn't move. Take it, I shouted, slamming my hand on the table. He flinched. I'm not taking your pills, Mom. He yelled back. This is insane. We are leaving. You're not leaving, I said. Not until you tell me why. I know about the loan sharks, Robert. I know about the $750,000 due at the end of the month. His mouth fell open. How? Arthur knew, I said. He hired a private investigator. He knew everything, the gambling, the debt, the lies. He knew, Robert whispered. The realization washed over him. He sank back into his chair. He knew? Yes, I said, and he cut you off. There is a codicil, Robert, an amendment to the will. He signed it 4 days before he died. He put your inheritance in a trust. You can't touch the principal. You can't use it to pay your debts. You killed him for nothing. The silence that followed was heavy. It was the sound of a world ending. Robert looked at Jessica. Jessica looked at the wall, refusing to meet his eyes. He cut me off? Robert's voice broke. He sounded like a child. But I needed that money. They're going to kill me, Mom. You don't understand. Vinny, he doesn't make idle threats. So you decided to trade your father's life for yours? I asked. You swapped his pills. You watched him swallow sugar every morning. You waited for his heart to stop. I didn't think it would happen so fast. Robert blurted out. There it was. I thought he would just get sick, Robert stammered. Tears streaming down his face now. I thought he would go to the hospital. I figured if he was in the hospital, I could get power of attorney then. I could access the accounts while he was recovering. I didn't want him to die. It was supposed to buy me time. You swapped his heart medication for sugar, I said, my voice cold as ice. You knew his condition. You rolled the dice with his life. I was desperate. Robert sobbed. I was scared. You have to help me, Mom, please. If I don't pay them by Tuesday. And you, I turned to Jessica, you knew. Jessica shrank back. I told him it was a bad idea. I told him. But you drove him here, I said. You sat at my table, you drank my wine. We can fix this, Robert said, reaching for my hand. Mom, please, just sign the papers. Give me the money. I'll pay the debt. We can forget this happened. Nobody has to know. The autopsy said natural causes. We can just move on. Move on. I asked, you want me to move on from the murder of my husband? It wasn't murder. Robert insisted. It was negligence. It was an accident. Mom, I'm your son. You can't send me to prison. You can't. I looked at him. I looked at the man who used to be my baby boy. I saw the fear in his eyes, but I didn't see remorse. I only saw regret that he got caught. I reached into my pocket. I can't send you to prison, Robert, I said softly. Hope flared in his eyes. Thank you. Oh God, thank you, Mom. But I said, pulling out the small black key fob for the alarm system. They can. I pressed the panic button. A siren began to wail. A piercing, deafening shriek that filled the house. Blue and red lights flashed through the dining room window. They had been waiting in the driveway. Mom. Robert stood up, knocking his chair over. What did you do? I recorded it, Robert the First said, pointing to the picture frame. Audio and video, the camera is in the frame. You just confessed to negligent homicide. and tampering with prescription medication. The front door burst open. Police. Nobody move. Detectives swarmed into the hallway. Detective Miller was in the lead. Robert looked at the door. He looked at the window. He looked at me. "You set me up," he whispered. "You're my mother. How could you?" "I gave you life," Robert the First said, standing tall as the police entered the room. "And you took Arthur's. I am balancing the books." Detective Miller walked in. He looked at the pill bottle on the tray. He looked at Robert. "Robert Vance," he said, pulling out his handcuffs, "you have the right to remain silent." Robert didn't fight. He slumped. He let them cuff him. As they led him away, he looked back at me one last time. His eyes were empty. Jessica was crying, screaming that she didn't do anything, that it was all him. They cuffed her too, accomplice. I stood alone in the dining room. The siren was still wailing. The blue lights were still flashing. I looked at the empty chair at the head of the table. "Dessert is served, Arthur," I whispered. The silence that follows a siren is the heaviest silence in the world. It presses down on your ears and makes the ringing in your head sound like a church bell. After the police cars pulled away, carrying my son and his wife to the county jail, the house felt enormous. It felt empty. But for the first time in a week, it felt clean. Detective Miller stayed behind for a while. He was a good man with kind eyes, and a job that showed him the worst of humanity. He was wearing blue latex gloves as he carefully placed the orange pill bottle into an evidence bag. He sealed it with red tape. Then he went to the sideboard and ejected the SD card from the picture frame. "You did good work, Mrs. Vance," he said, pocketing the card. "I've seen confessions in interrogation rooms that weren't this clear." He admitted to the motive, the means, and the opportunity. With the lab results from these pills, the DA is going to go for murder one. Not negligence, premeditated murder. I sat in my chair at the head of the table. I hadn't moved. I was staring at Robert's empty wine glass. The lipstick stain from where Jessica had sipped was still on the rim of hers. "It doesn't feel like good work, Detective," I said quietly. "Feels like an amputation. I cut off a limb to save the body." "He was dangerous," Ma'am Miller said gently. "If he owed that kind of money to those kinds of people, you were next. Once the money ran out, or if you held the purse strings too tight. Well, we see it all the time." "I know," I said. "That is why I pressed the button." The next few weeks were a blur of legal meetings and news vans parked at the end of my driveway. The Vance family scandal was front-page news. They called me the Black Widow's mother. I stopped reading the papers. I stopped answering the phone unless it was Charles or the detective. Robert tried to call from jail, collect. I declined every time. I had nothing left to say to him. The recording said everything. About a month after the arrest, Charles came to the house. He looked better. The stress lines around his eyes had softened. He carried a briefcase, but this time, he didn't look like he was carrying the weight of the world. "Coffee?" I asked, pouring him a cup in the sunroom. "Please," he said. He sat down and opened his case. "The arraignment is over." They both pleaded not guilty, of course, but their lawyers are scrambling. Jessica is already trying to cut a deal. She claims she was coerced. She's offering to testify against Robert in exchange for a reduced sentence. "Let her," I said, sipping my tea. "They deserve each other." "What about the sharks? The debt?" "That is the interesting part," Charles said, a grim smile playing on his lips. Since Robert is in federal custody, and his assets have been frozen as proceeds of attempted fraud, the private lenders have backed off. They don't like federal attention. They wrote off the debt as a loss. Robert is safe from them at least. He traded the sharks for the wolves in the prison yard. And the estate? I asked. Probate is moving forward, Charles said. But we have a decision to make, Eleanor. The codicil, the trust. Technically, under the Slayer rule, a murderer cannot inherit from their victim. Robert is automatically disinherited by law, once convicted. But that process takes time. And until then, the money sits there. I looked out the window at Arthur's rose garden. It was starting to bloom. He loved those roses. He used to say that you have to prune the dead wood to let the new flowers grow. I don't want the money sitting there, Charles I said. I don't want a single penny of the money Robert killed for to sit in an account with his name attached to it, even hypothetically. I want it gone. Gone? Charles asked. Eleanor, it is millions of dollars. You need to live. I have my pension, I said. I have the house, I have enough. Arthur made his fortune building things. I want his money to keep building things. Specifically, I want it to build something that fixes broken hearts. I turned to Charles. Do you remember the Heart Institute at the university? I asked. The one where Arthur had his surgery 5 years ago? I do, Charles said. Draft the paperwork, I said. I am liquidating the investment portfolio. All of it. The part that would have been Robert's and the part that is mine. I am keeping a modest rainy day fund, and the rest goes to them. Charles stared at me. You're donating the entire fortune? Yes, I said. But I have one condition. A specific naming right. The Arthur Vance wing? Charles guessed. No, I said. I want it to be named the Arthur Vance Center for Cardiac Research. But I want a plaque. A very specific plaque right in the lobby, where everyone can see it. What do you want it to say? I smiled. It was the first genuine smile I had felt in weeks. I want the plaque to read, I said, looking Charles dead in the eye. The Arthur Vance Center. Funded entirely by the forfeited inheritance of Robert Vance. Proof that a strong heart always outlasts a greedy hand. Charles choked on his coffee. He coughed, wiping his mouth with a handkerchief. Eleanor, that is permanent. It will be there for 100 years. Robert's children, if he ever has them, will see it. Good, I said. Let it be a history lesson. I don't want his name scrubbed from history, Charles. I want it remembered exactly for what it is. He wanted to be famous. He wanted a legacy. Fine, I will give him one. He will be the man who accidentally cured heart disease because he was too greedy to work for a living. Charles smiled then. It was a genuine smile. I'll draw it up. The dedication ceremony took place a year later. It was a crisp autumn day, much like the day Arthur died. The leaves were turning gold and red. The hospital lobby was packed. There were doctors in white coats, donors in suits, and the press. The flashbulbs popped as I cut the red ribbon. I wore a bright blue dress. No more black, I was done mourning. When they unveiled the plaque on the wall, there was a collective gasp from the reporters. They scribbled furiously in their notepads. It was the perfect ending to the Black Widow's mother saga. The headline the next day read, "Widow turns blood money into life support." I heard later, through a guard who knew a friend of a friend, about the day Robert saw the news. He was sitting in the common room of the federal penitentiary. He had been sentenced to 25 years without parole. The judge had called his crime chillingly calculated. He was watching the small TV mounted in the corner of the cage. When the news report came on, when they showed the plaque with his name on it, not as a donor but as a cautionary tale, he apparently stood up and threw his plastic lunch tray at the screen. He screamed until they dragged him to solitary. He realized then that I hadn't just taken his freedom, I had taken his name. I had turned his greed into my husband's glory. It has been 2 years now. The house is quiet, but it is a good quiet. I went back to work in a way. I volunteer at the high school 3 days a week, tutoring advanced chemistry students. I teach them about covalent bonds and unstable elements. I teach them that every action has a reaction. Sometimes when I am in the garden, crushing eggshells with my mortar and pestle to feed the roses, I think about that orange bottle. I kept it. It sits on the mantelpiece empty now. It reminds me that I am not just a grandmother who bakes cookies. I am a scientist. I am a survivor. And I am the woman who looked evil in the face and turned it into sugar. Arthur is gone, but his heart is still beating in that hospital wing. Every time a patient walks out of those doors healed and whole, that is Arthur winning. And Robert, he is exactly where he belongs, in a box, just like the one he tried to put his father in. Oh. Well, friends, that is the story of how I served my son his just desserts. It is a hard thing to realize your child is broken, but it is a harder thing to let them break you. I chose to survive. What would you have done? Would you have called the police? Or would you have tried to handle it quietly? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this story of justice served cold and sweet, make sure to like and subscribe. I have a lot more stories in my recipe book. Until next time, check your labels and hug your loved ones.